Hello, welcome to the University of Reading's second Open Research Award event. We held our first one in 2019, and it's great to be running again with another event. My name is Phil Newton. I'm the University of Reading's champion for open research. It's a role I'm absolutely delighted to play because I really do feel that open research is absolutely critical for the quality and trustworthiness of research, and will become increasingly so in the future. So we've got a great programme here today. We've got a keynote talk that really takes a global perspective. Then we've got a presentation on progress at the University of Reading with open research. And then after a break, we've got presentations from the finalists from our Open Research Award competition, voting from everybody present here today for the best presentation, and the prizes to be awarded. Just in terms of some housekeeping, the event will be recorded and made publicly available afterwards. Please keep your cameras off and your microphones on mute. We're only expecting the presenters and the chairs to actually speak. Now, I hope you'll have some questions for our speakers. If you could post them in the chat. And if you're looking at the questions and there are questions that you particularly like asked, if you can give them a thumbs up like sign, and then we will try and prioritise those questions to the speakers afterwards. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. This is Sarah de Rijcke from Leiden University in the Netherlands. Sarah's day job is as Professor of Science and Technology and Innovation Studies at the university. Scientific Director of the Centre for Science and Technology Studies, and also co-chairs internationally the Research on Research Institute. Sarah's rare specialism is in social studies of research evaluation, and she's been hugely influential on both the national and international landscape in this respect. Not least, she is one co-author of the Leiden Manifesto for Research Metrics, which indeed is very, very close to the University of Reading's responsible research assessment protocol and guidelines. We've essentially borrowed the Leiden Manifesto, and she's also currently co-authoring the UNESCO recommendations on open science. So without further ado, I'm delighted to hand over to Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. So if all went well, you can now see my slides. And good, thank you. Thank you all for tuning in. I cannot see all of your faces. We've become accustomed to this situation, but it's of course not the preferable mode of interaction. I hope I can still inspire you virtually during this keynote. And I'd like to start with a quote. And the quote is this one. Recent events do not give me hope, but they do give me purpose. So this is from Kathleen Fitzpatrick's fantastic book on how universities can become more generous, in which she charges us all, I think, with thinking constructively rather than competitively, and also thinking about a university in terms of building new ideas, preferring listening over speaking, community over individualism, and also collaboration over competition, and maybe also openness over a more entrenched research. I think we all know and also feel how relevant and urgent that call is, and I wish I actually had written it. It's very close to my heart. So why start with this one? Well, one reason is that especially the last 3 to 5 years, we clearly see through many high-level initiatives across the globe that concern has intensified over, for instance, the misapplication of performance metrics. Phil just mentioned the Leiden Manifesto. That was an initiative to indeed target specifically the use of metrics in assessment contexts. Misapplication that contributes to enormous pressures on researchers, also deepens problems with research integrity, reproducibility. We also see a reduction of the diversity of research missions and purposes. This leads institutions and researchers also to adopt similar strategic priorities to focus on lower risk or even incremental work. There's also issues with systemic biases against those who do not meet or choose not to prioritize narrow criteria and indicators of quality and impact. And we see, I think, also a diversion of attention in policy and in management to things that can be measured, to university rankings, at the expense of less tangible, quantifiable qualities, at the expense of more open research. Now, this is a comment by Philip Ball, science writer, editor of Nature, in which he describes how science has changed over the past century toward more team science, big science, toward fulfilling its social contract by confronting issues of global reach and existential urgency, as he calls it, including climate breakdown and, with some foresight, epidemics as well. Ball and many other pundits, I think, signal important changes to the institutions that underpin research, including research communication. Can papers, can monographs still contain the research results of today? But not only communication, also peer review. Can peer review still work the way it once did? Not only peer review, but also evaluation systems at large. Do systems of credit still work to acknowledge the diversification of roles in research, or are they actually failing? And I think I would say that they are currently failing, unfortunately. Because what we currently see, actually all too often, I think, is that we resort to easy to use indicators and metrics to assess science and also scientists on the basis of the availability of data about performance. And what we are not doing is looking for answers where they are more likely to be found. So this is called the streetlight effect of indicators. And I've tried to visualize this effect in a schematic representation to give you a sense of what I think is quite a severe issue. So you see here in the largest circle a representation of all the potential problems in the world. And within that space, you see in blue the space of research. So those problems that can be addressed by doing research. And within that space, in yellow, is the smaller space of research that is in fact well illuminated with the most common indicators we're currently using to assess research and also researchers. And this streetlight effect is the effect of mistaking the light with the problems. And it's really hard, I think, to defend. It's really hard to defend that what is out there in the gray zone isn't relevant, of course. I think it's important to realize that questions dealt by research under the streetlight is better rewarded, often at the expense of other forms of research and also other activities. Now, all that could be seen, I think, as a purely technical issue, but it isn't. It is not a technical issue at all, because what is left out isn't random. And there's really politics of in and exclusion going on. So there's a potential marginalization on a couple of fronts. Think, for instance, of topics that fall outside the mainstream. Think about parts of the work done by social sciences and humanities that are not covered well in citation databases. Think of non-English publications, which also don't count in the same way. And think of whole sectors that are less visible under the streetlight, including low-tech research, agricultural research, research done with and also by the creative industry. And these are just a few examples. So I would argue that that is the move you see here that we should facilitate. We should use research evaluation and indicators to our advantage. Let them help us open up and broaden out what can be researched. And I think this is also where open research comes in. So open research has many advantages. The broader public should have unrestricted free access to scientific publications, could also be more closely involved in the design and also implementation of research. And researchers themselves should also be enabled to more easily access outputs from colleagues, share current research with each other. And that, of course, offers then new research opportunities, for example, because researchers can then use data from others. And I think it can also bring about a change in the research culture. A culture, unfortunately, where the emphasis is still very much on competition. That is actually a culture that is increasingly being criticized because it comes with really suboptimal knowledge sharing and also a very restricted notion of quality. So with open research, the emphasis is placed more on collaboration and on sharing. And we've also seen some of the benefits, I think, of that open research culture in the current pandemic. Now, what I would like to show you is a key finding of a global survey of responsible research assessment that we did in the participating organizations of the Global Research Council. The key finding is about open research. So most of the organizations that are linked with the JRC are national public funding agencies. And what you see here on the slide is a working paper with the survey results in it, but the report also does more because it also explores what responsible research assessment is, where it comes from, outlines the content and also the shape and the direction of the debates around responsible research assessment. It was published in November last year, alongside the virtual conference that the Global Research Council held on responsible research assessment. And it was co-authored by a team drawn from DORA, from the Researcher and Research Institute, and my institute in Leiden, and also the National Research Foundation of South Africa. And the Global Research Council conference, so that focused on emerging priorities for RRIA, for responsible research assessment. It looked into how the global funder community is responding to these priorities. And the survey established context and also a baseline for these discussions. It was sent to 120 participant observations. I also always say participant observation because I do ethnographic work, so I make that mistake more often. I mean participant organizations. It was open from the beginning of September to the start of October last year, and it was completed in the end by 55 organizations from all world regions. And I will now show you that headline finding related to open research. But I'll start with the relatively unsurprising finding that you see here on the slide. About half of the organizations who filled in the survey indicated that their reviewers use metrics such as the number of highly cited publications, number of publications in high-ranking journals, number of citations, and also the H-index to measure research productivity. And alt metrics were also reasonably popular because they were used by reviewers in 1 out of 3 organizations. And in 30 of the 55 organizations, external reviewers also actually read and qualitatively assessed the output of the applicants. 4 didn't yet, but they did report that they were going to use more qualitative assessment forms in the future. Now, what's interesting here is that 76% of the respondents also assess non-publication outputs, such as software, code, algorithms, data sets. 4 organizations reported that they will consider including non-publication outputs in the future. And more good news on open science is that not only do most respondents encourage and also promote open access and open research, between 41 and 46% also indicated that they are considering including open access publications and data curations and open research data in their future evaluation practices. And I think that is a really important finding. I think these findings are really indicative of a very lively and also a progressive engagement with open research, which is now also starting to impact funder practices on a global scale. I think it's also moving from an initial focus on open access to a more holistic focus on fostering a more healthy research culture at large. And I think that shift is also clearly visible in the second global initiative I wanted to share with you today, and that is the UNESCO recommendation on open science that is currently being prepared, and Phil already mentioned that in his nice introduction. So UNESCO, the almost 200 member states tasked the organization with developing an international standard-setting instrument on open science in the form of a UNESCO recommendation. And that is done by UNESCO because it's the United Nations agency with a mandate also for science. So it's seen as a legitimate or the legitimate global organization to build this coherent vision of openness. And the idea is that it will become a shared set of overarching principles and shared values. With 3 other colleagues, I am a representative of the Western European and North American states, and in that capacity, I also contributed to writing parts of the recommendation. And well, unfortunately, the terminology of open science, I guess, is less inclusive than your own term, open research. But as you can see here, the actual operationalization is broader and more inclusive. It combines various movements and also practices aiming to make scientific knowledge openly available, more accessible, reusable for everyone, to increase collaborations and information sharing, to open the processes of knowledge creation, evaluation and communication also to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. It also includes all scientific disciplines and aspects of scholarly practices, so including basic and applied sciences, natural and social sciences, and the humanities. Now, in that recommendation, we have outlined 5 pillars. The first is open access to scientific knowledge. The second is open research infrastructures. The third is open communication. The fourth, open engagement with and of societal actors. And the fifth is open dialogue with other knowledge systems. And we've written down 6 key objectives of the recommendation, and you can see them on the slide here. So the first is to promote a common understanding of open research and the associated benefits and also challenges, and also the diversity of paths to open research. The second key objective that we have a couple of pages on is developing and enabling policy environment for open research, and I think we'll hear more about how that plays out in your own context after this talk. And the third key objective is investing in open research infrastructures and also services, a very crucial element of enabling open research in the first place. And the fourth key objective is investing in human resources, education, digital literacy, and also capacity building for open research. And the fifth, I guess, is closest to my own research and my own well, advocacy, maybe even, and that is fostering a culture of open research and aligning incentives for open research. And the final key objective that we discuss in the recommendation is promoting innovative approaches for open research at different stages of the scientific process. But Well, as I said, I think the University of Reading is taking important steps on a number, if not all of these fronts. We'll hear more about that from your Pro-Vice Chancellor of Research and Innovation after this keynote. But before I hand you back to Phil and to the chair, basically, I would like to briefly zoom in on that 5th key objective of the recommendation, and that's the one on aligning incentives. So I'm so happy that this UNESCO recommendation is coming about, because I really think we need a global initiative like this to break the barriers in the way we assess researchers and to really change this current research culture, to reward researchers for sharing and also for collaborating and engaging with society. And the recommendation specifies that this requires a combined effort of many different stakeholders, which makes it also very complex, but it's necessary, this combined effort. So including the funders we looked at briefly, universities, but also journals, scientific societies across disciplines and also across countries. We also, under that 5th key objective, recommend to nation states to review research assessment procedures and also career evaluation systems in order to align them with the principles of open research. Because we realize, and I think we all realize, that a commitment to open research requires time, it requires actions, and it requires resources that cannot always be automatically converted into traditional academic outputs, such as publications. But these actions can have a significant impact on science and also society. The 3rd thing we recommend is to promote the development of and also the implementation of evaluation and assessment systems that build on the existing efforts to improve the ways in which scientific outputs are evaluated. You can think here of the DORA Declaration, but also the Leiden Manifesto. An increased focus on quality rather than quantity, using indicators, if you will, more wide-ranging than journal-based metrics. They go beyond the journal impact factor. And this specific section in the recommendation, which was actually very important to write, it was also a long discussion how to formulate this exactly, in which metric should we specify a metric or not. But so it's deliberate that we say journal-based metrics and going beyond the journal impact factor. We also recommend to promote evaluation systems that give value to all relevant research activities and scientific outputs, including high quality fair data and metadata, well documented and reusable software, protocols, workflows, and also machine readable summaries of findings. We also recommend to promote systems that take into account evidence of research impact and knowledge exchange, such as widening participation in the research process, influence on policy and practice, and also engaging with open innovation in collaboration with industrial partners. And of course, we also promote systems that take into account the diversity of disciplines and also different career stages, with particular attention to researchers at the beginning of their careers. And the recommendation under that 5th objective further says that member states should ensure that the practice of open research is known and also well understood, standardized element in an academic recruitment and promotion setting, and that all stakeholders are encouraged to adopt policies that require and reward open access to scientific knowledge, including scientific publications, open research data, open software, source code, open hardware, and that we ensure diversity in scholarly publication or communications, that adhere to the principles of open and transparent and equitable access. And importantly, also supporting non-commercial publishing models, collaborative publishing models with no article processing charges or book processing charges. So that recommendation has been in the making for a while now. The timeline you see here. So the UNESCO General Conference was the 40th session in November 2019. It decided to elaborate a draft recommendation on open science. So we got to work after that. The first draft was sent to UNESCO member states in September 2020 for comments by 31 December of that year. And then the Open Science Advisory Committee and also the UNESCO Secretariat have taken these comments into account in the draft text of the recommendation and the related final report sent to UNESCO member states in March of this year. And it has then been examined by technical and also legal experts. These are designated also by member states. So it's a really layered process. And the approved draft will be submitted to member states in August of this year with a view to its adoption by the General Conference at the 41st session in November of this year. Now, of course, there's also resistance to change. This resistance, you probably know it. It's often driven by concerns about quality control. For instance, about upholding quality in peer review. People, for instance, ask how robust and reliable are new paradigms and methods, or is open research not too complex, too time-consuming? Does it really count? And of course, also for those researchers that are really well rewarded by the current system, there's little incentive to change. And what's also a real hard challenge is to move away from paywall publications, away from bad metrics, away from rankings, towards more holistic forms of publication and also assessment. And I think, well, early career researchers should really express or let their voice heard, but I think senior leaders in universities are really also very pivotal to this shift. So they really must drive forward cultural changes. They need to place more emphasis also on rewarding open research. And I think Reading University is taking important steps in this direction with its commitment to the aims and principles of open research. You have a dedicated action plan, open research champions, a handbook, and also an open research award. So there's really good cause to be upbeat, I think, about all these developments. I think the survey findings I showed you, the UNESCO recommendation, I think these are indicative of a very lively engagement with open research on a global level. And that momentum, I think, continues to build, will continue to build. And of course, I think funders are a particular group. They may have a bit more freedom, more agency also to experiment and drive change than many others feel they have in the system. But we obviously also see movement at universities. So you're in the middle of such a change process, I think, yourselves. That's, of course, really what we're here to celebrate today, open research at the University of Reading. And I really look forward to learning more about the great case studies you have and that will be presented, And I really hope you will also join me in applauding all participants of today's event, all the open research champions and the organizations at your university. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That's a brilliant talk, absolutely fascinating. On the one hand, gives us great encouragement that things are being taken forward at this international level, as well as the national levels and local levels, but also at the same time demonstrates how far we have to go. And I think in that cartoon at the end, I'm not sure we have as many hands in the air for who wants change as your cartoon indicates. We've still got to get those hands in the air, as well as addressing who actually wants to change as individuals. So thank you very much. Just a reminder, if you've got questions, if you can post them in the chat, because we won't be going to anybody on microphones. Just to kick off the questions, you mentioned that absolutely critical here is this balance between competition and collaboration, that we've got to shift more towards collaboration and away from some of the more negative aspects of competition. Have you got any thoughts about how we can incentivize shifting that balance?
Yeah, that's one of the wicked problems, I guess, because in my experience, how competition is perceived also varies per discipline. So it's a bit broad strokes, but in some disciplines it's actually stimulated and also seen as a positive thing, but that's not always the case and everywhere the case. I think one crucial element in the landscape of responsible research assessment practices is the move towards rewarding teamwork. And I don't think we are there yet, that we have the instruments in place to do that yet, that well yet. But I think what we've seen is an increasing focus on the individual and the individual and his or her career in research assessment practices. And one of the ways out, I think, is to zoom out a little bit to that level of the team, and that can also be done in disciplines that might at first be a bit skeptical about whether or not they participate in teamwork in the first place. I think some fields in the humanities might say we don't do teamwork, but in the end I do think everyone is connected up, and you can see that in acknowledgements in books, for instance. So I think there must be a way to do justice to these epistemic differences, but also reward the more collaborative aspects of doing research, and move a little bit away from that idea of the lone wolf and the genius scholar.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I have another question. Are there good models in the Netherlands of funders and institutions working together to transform research culture that we can learn from? Well, that's a nice question to ask. So that gives me an opportunity to mention an initiative that is currently ongoing. What we have now in the Netherlands is a concerted effort by the umbrella organization of universities, the VSNU, but also the academic medical centers where all the biomedical research is housed, and two of the major funders, and the Royal Institute of Arts and Sciences is also behind this. So this is a consortium of big stakeholders that have published a position paper on changing research culture, basically, recognition and rewards in the Netherlands, including more open science or open research practices. I'm so European in this respect. Didn't manage to use this term open research here. So they've set out, they've tasked all universities with organizing around new recognition and reward practices. So we all have steering groups. I'm co-chairing one in Leiden, and we are tasked to foster this change process and to really align with more responsible practices. So open science, teamwork,
but also a move away from quantity and toward quality. And one of the things that the funders are doing, and they're not doing that in the Netherlands alone, but they're working, I think you have examples in the UK as well, with more narrative CVs. So that's also an intervention around a tool that we all use to assess and review each other's portfolio. And they're playing with that format. I'm saying playing, I don't mean it that playfully, but they're shifting around the building blocks of the CV to forefront the research and the ideas, and to downplay the esteem criteria that we usually set at the beginning, like I did my postdoc in Harvard, these types of things.
Yeah, and it's true, certainly in the UK, for some of the people listening may not be aware that our main funder, UKRI, is indeed moving to narrative CVs, so they'll be coming soon.
Coming to you soon, yes.
Yes. Time for one final question, and that's, I thought that the COVID-19 pandemic would result in greater shift towards open research than the evidence suggests. What do you think is the reason for this?
Yeah, I think it still has to do with, I think the simplest answer is probably that it has to do with the level of competition on a global level that we are in as scholars. I do think we've seen the benefits of sharing, but there's also, I think, a huge set of players, the journals and the publishers, that don't play the game, or they have for a while, but now they've paywalled stuff again. So that's where we also need a concerted effort. So we've seen the benefit, but to be honest, we've also seen in the pandemic that we really have some fundamental systemic issues, not only related to open research, but also to, for instance, gender differences, or people with care responsibilities not able to publish. So all these things have also come to the forefront. So the good things, the capacity to change when we all play along, but also the bad things, the systemic issues that are really wicked problems.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. We'll leave it there. Again, thank you much for a brilliant talk, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the meeting this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
We may hear from you again later in the afternoon. Moving on then, we are going to have a little bit more focus on the local now, and in terms of University of Reading's progress in open research and the sorts of challenges we're finding along the way. And so for this, I'm going to hand over to Parveen Yaqoob, our Deputy Vice Chancellor and Pro Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation. Over to you, Parveen.
Thank you very much, Phil, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm really delighted to be joining this event. A very warm welcome to all of those of you who are joining. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen if I can. I think this is the one. No, that's not right. Sorry about that. I've got way too many things open on my dashboard. It might be that I don't have control. I don't know if anyone can have a look at that.
Robert or Fred, can you advise on that?
Fred, can we just check that Parveen has permissions?
Yeah, you're set up as a presenter, Parveen.
Okay, I'm going to try something.
That's looking hopeful. Yeah, great.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, so sorry about that. So first of all, thank you so much, Sarah, for kicking off the event with such an inspiring call for action to foster a culture of open research. I'm going to start by reiterating some of the key points that Sarah has already covered, what open research is and how it benefits everyone, just very briefly, before describing some of the work that we've been doing at Reading to support and promote open research practice. And of course, the awards today are part of that. So let's start with a simple definition of open research. It's a university objective to increase the quality, integrity and accessibility of our research. And we plan to do that by using modern technologies, scholarship, transparency in the research process, and in the reproducibility of research results, and also in sharing open practices. In January 2019, we published a statement on open research, and Sarah actually showed this in one of her slides. And in that statement, we made a public commitment to the principle and aims of open research. In fact, we were the first UK university to do so, and others have since followed our example. So that's something to be proud of. And as you can see from this slide, there are lots of examples of how you can be open in your research. So obviously the most basic and widely adopted aspect of open research is open access publishing and sharing, where relevant, of data supporting the findings. And the benefits of that are fairly obvious. And of course, they're requirements of university policy. They increase the exposure and citation of your work because it's not behind a paywall, as Sarah has explained very clearly. And importantly, it makes it available to researchers who don't have very good access. You need to do it because it's a requirement if your research is publicly funded. The public can actually see the results of your research, so they can see where their taxes have gone. And finally, your research can be included in policies or applied by practitioners. So Sarah touched on many of these points, but there's a lot more to open research than open access and data sharing. And this slide summarises the benefits of open research. So that includes the fact that it opens up opportunities for collaboration, networking and funding by making research more visible. The research itself has greater impact and return on investment. It's a faster route to knowledge transfer and public engagement. Organisations such as NGOs can get early access to the research, make it possible to achieve practical benefits really quickly, and national governments can use the research as a basis for evidence-informed policy. Now, not all of these things will be relevant to all types of research and all disciplines, but it's probably fair to say that many are related to science. But that's not to say that open research is irrelevant to the humanities and social sciences. And I'm really pleased to say that you'll be able to see evidence of that later when we hear the finalists for the Open Research Awards give their presentations. Now, I asked the question about COVID-19 because there's been a lot of publicity around the suggestion that the pandemic has led to a step change in opening up research and is making us think differently about accessibility of data in the future. But is that really true? Well, when I looked at the data, it seems that of the almost 6,000 articles related to COVID-19 that were published between December 2019 and April 2020, that's only a 5-month period, but we see that only 13.6% published the underlying research data. Only 1.7% referenced data in a repository, only 1.2% published data in a reusable format, and more than 75% of the documents were PDFs with text and graphics lacking any raw data. So if this is the picture for research that could be a matter of life and death in a pandemic and a step change from what is normal practice, you can imagine what normal practice looks like. As many as 64% of publications are locked behind a paywall. I'm sure there are various estimates for that figure. So a lack of transparency and accessibility is really an issue across all disciplines. And if we think about Reading specifically, well, our Research Council funded researchers should be complying with 2 data sharing policies, the Research Council policy and the university one. But only 15% of the articles describing research funded by a UK Research Council contained a link to the raw data stored in a repository, which is the gold standard for data sharing. So it's clear that we're still far from a step change, but that doesn't mean that we can't take small steps towards a change. And we have a list on our website of 12 things that you can do to be open. This is ideal for people who are just starting out. So open access publishing, as I indicated, is well established, but going beyond that to make your primary data fair, that's findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable is even better. Pre-registering your research plans is now common in some disciplines, but we could go further than that, for example, by advertising our data or software as a research resource and bringing open research even into our teaching. In April this year, we were delighted to appoint 19 open research champions across many of our schools. They are the flagship of our Open Research Action Plan, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And their role is to model open research practice, to use their networks to advocate for open research and share information, to help their peers and colleagues and signpost university support, to organise and help to deliver open research training and information sessions, to take part in open research forum meetings like this one, to lead and take part in projects and initiatives both within and outside the university, to inform the university strategy by advocating the needs of their school and discipline. And as I said, they're absolutely central to our Open Research Action Plan. So I thought I had a picture here of our open research champions, but I seem to have missed that somehow. But they, as I said, they're spread across a range of schools and disciplines. And just to give you an example, some of the things that they're doing. Alanna Skuse is championing open access monographs. Christiana Garcia is trialling electronic notebooks in the School of Chemistry, Food and Pharmacy. Pete Bray from Archaeology is promoting the publication of preprints and preservation of historical data. And we have no less than 4 champions from the School of Psychology and Clinical Language Sciences, which has really been leading the way in terms of embedding reproducible practices. And I also want to use the opportunity to flag our first Open Research Forum event on Wednesday, the 7th of July. It's going to be an opportunity to hear from some of those champions about their open research activities and projects. Now, this slide refers to the UK Reproducibility Network, UKRN, which we joined in January 2020. It's a national peer-led consortium promoting robust research, providing training and disseminating best practice. And Phil Newton serves as our institutional link with the UKRN, with Etienne Roche having the role of local network lead. So our Open Research Action Plan was launched earlier this year. It's led by Phil, Robert Darby, Etienne Roche, Alison Sutton, Maria Broadbridge, and its purpose is to translate our commitment to open research into action. It has 4 main themes, and we're developing researchers using these themes by providing a range of training opportunities, software carpentry workshops, improving statistical skills through training. I've mentioned the open research champions in the schools. We're supporting researcher-led projects with small amounts of internal funding and supporting bids for external funding. We have a research software engineering community that shares skills, resources and training to improve standards in coding and research software. By growing the capability of digital approaches to humanities research, we're working in collaboration with library services. On infrastructure, we're working with the Library Research Engagement Team, which curates the university's repository and research data archive, and it's looking at Plan S and research data management with us. We're working to embed open research criteria into recruitment, reward and promotion, and Sarah had spoken really enthusiastically about that. We want to make sure that it's properly recognised and becomes part of our culture. So we'll be working with research divisions on that, including it in the induction programme for research division leads and also in the annual research planning process. We plan to nurture our key external relationships, particularly with the UKRN, but also the Centre for Open Science, the UK Research Software Engineering Network and the Library Research Engagement Networks. And finally, our comms and marketing teams will be promoting activities which will be coordinated by the library team, the research teams, the graduate school, people development. And the Open Research Awards that we're celebrating today are all part of that. They've become a bit of a beacon in the sector thanks to the trailblazing by Robert Darby and library colleagues, and a number of other universities are now following our example. You can take a look at the Open Research Plan on our web pages. So that's all I wanted to say. I'm very happy to answer any questions, but I do hope you enjoy the event. After the questions, we're going to take a short break, but we will then return for the Open Research Award finalists to give their presentations and, of course, announcement of the winner. So I'm going to try and stop sharing now.
Thanks very much, Parveen. That was great, and congratulations on de-sharing more swiftly than sharing originally. During your talk, Fred and Robert and Etienne were busy posting links to the various activities that you mentioned. So if anybody at this meeting wants to follow up and find out more about those, please do look at the links in the chat. And please, in the coming weeks and months, feel free to ask any of us, Parveen, myself, Robert Darby, Fred Breeze, Etienne Roche, Alison Sutton, if you have questions about open research at the university, and please do ask us or your open research champion, who hopefully will soon be known to you. Parveen, I thought that it was really very striking about the very low levels of open data practice in the COVID example you gave. Why do you think people are so reluctant to share their data? And have you got any thoughts about what we can do to improve really what is quite a stark situation in some disciplines?
To be honest, I think people think that it's harder than it actually is. And so I think what we need to do is to communicate better why they should be doing it in the first place, and actually how easy it is. Robert and the team that support our data archiving have made it a very easy process to follow, but perhaps we're not communicating that clearly enough. And I think also when we're communicating our research both inside and outside our organisation, we should flag the fact that the data is openly available, because the more that people both inside and outside the organisation hear you saying that, the more they might think, well, if they're doing it, maybe we should be thinking about doing it as well. You're on mute, Phil.
I've done so well getting this far. One final question before we break. From your perspective at the University of Reading, and when you're looking at all these challenges and open research and the things we hope to do, what do you think are the one or two hardest things to actually try and make a difference in and make some advances on? What are the ones that you think that we've got to really focus on trying to crack?
Well, culture change is always difficult, isn't it? And I think you've touched on one area which I think is a significant challenge, and that is our poor track record so far of making our data openly available. But I think Sarah also talked about the culture change around assessment of research, and I think we've got quite a journey there. So one of the things that I'm working on at the moment is an easy to follow guide for any recruitment panel and any panel assessing academic probation promotion to follow responsible metrics. We're taking that to a committee next week. We'll need to talk to HR. We'll need to consult with the union. But I think it's a case of educating not just the panels who are doing the assessment, but actually those who are putting in applications for either a job or promotion, because they think that H-index is important. They think that they're expected to provide the type of evidence that we're used to providing. So it really is a culture change from beginning to end.
Great. Thank you very much, Parveen, again for your presentation, and again to you, Sarah. We're going to take a 10-minute break now, and we will resume at 2:05 with the presentations. So thank you, and see you shortly.
Right, welcome back, everyone. My name's Robert Darby. I'm the Research Data Manager here at Reading, so I'll be the compere for the finalists' presentations today. We have 4 superb finalists with case studies embracing open source software development, scientific data sharing, and publishing open access in the humanities. Our finalists will have 10 minutes to present their open research case studies, and then there will be up to 5 minutes allotted for questions after each talk. So as before, if you do have a question for one of our finalists, please post this into the chat. If you want to endorse someone else's question, please give it a thumbs up, and we'll try to select 2 or 3 of the most popular questions. I would also encourage all of you to show your appreciation for our finalists at the end of their questions segment with some virtual applause. So please look for the smiley face and waving hand image at the top of your screen. You can hover over this to select some virtual applause. After the finalists have presented, it will be your opportunity to vote for the best presentation, and there will be a £150 prize for the winner. Following this vote, Professor Parveen Yaqoob will announce the placement of the finalists as determined by our award panel, and the winner of the 2021 Open Research Award will be announced. So now we come to the presentations. We will be timing these to ensure our presenters keep to their allotted 10 minutes. If anyone is still going strong at 9.5 minutes, I might come onto the mic just with a 30-second warning so that they know to wrap up in time. So let me introduce our first finalist. Ting Sun is a research fellow in meteorology, and he has been working with Professor Sue Grimmond to develop and support open source software for urban climate modelling. So over to you, Ting. Please share your slides and start whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Robert, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present at this Open Research Award event. Today, I'll talk about SuPy, a Python version of an urban climate model, SUEWS, and how we are using it to build an open research community. This is joint work with Professor Sue Grimmond and others. Both Sue and I are in the Department of Meteorology. We work in the field of urban meteorology and climate. The world is rapidly urbanizing. Although cities only cover less than 1% of global land surface, today more than 55% of world's population are living in cities, and this percentage is projected to be 70% by 2050, which means more and more people will be influenced by urban environmental issues. And the climate is changing. We need to forecast for these urban citizens and urban infrastructure, which can be critical to the well-being of most countries and vulnerable to meteorological events. Under a changing climate, urban areas may experience more weather extremes, such as heat waves, intense rainfall, cold spells, etc. From this, there are societal implications related to human health, infrastructure safety, energy sustainability, etc. Urban climate also interacts with weather extremes to exacerbate conditions in cities and downwind. So, for many reasons, we need a better understanding of urban climate. One powerful tool used to deepen our understanding is urban climate modeling. UMAP, the Urban Multi-Scale Environmental Predictor, a comprehensive urban climate toolbox, has been developed by our group together with other international collaborators. It can pre-process various data to prepare for urban climate modeling, perform urban climate simulations, and post-process the simulation results into products for climate services. UMAP is available as an open source QGIS plugin on all platforms, Windows, Mac, and Linux. Since being published in 2018, UMAP has had more than 20,000 downloads so far. One cornerstone component of UMAP is SUEWS, Surface Urban Energy and Water Balance Scheme. SUEWS can simulate energy and water fluxes from cities. It accounts for different urban forms such as buildings, paved surfaces, vegetations, etc. It can model variable human activities such as building operation, traffic, and etc. Being a key part of UMAP, SUEWS is the only module that is not in Python. SUEWS is written in Fortran, so computationally more efficient and is within other models such as WRF. But to make the link to other tools within UMAP and elsewhere, we have developed SuPy, SUEWS in Python. And Python is a widely used computer language for open research. There are a wide range of support within the open community. This allows SuPy users and developers to utilize many resources. For example, model benchmarking is usually critical to ensuring that code developments are working in the intended way. The rapid statistical and graphical analysis combined with compiling and debugging allows rapid delivery to multiple platforms of the new version of a rigorously tested software. For determination of new model parameter values, optimization processes can use open Python routines rather than the proprietary Fortran options. Similarly, for many open Python visualization packages, they can help simulation results to be analyzed in one ecosystem. Based on Python, SuPy provides an integrated solution for rapid configuration of model runs, analysis through to final production graphics. 3 key open practices have been adopted in the SuPy project. First, open development. We made all source code open, and the open automatic test and development uses GitHub Actions. For each piece of code submitted to our code repository, GitHub Actions perform predefined tests to help the quality control. These automatic tests not only help make the code more robust, but also encourage outside collaborators to contribute their code in confidence. There can be much less concern the new code will break things, and the tests will identify and prevent such incidents. Second, open documentation. This allows coding and documentation to go together, so the scientific and technical details can be well recorded. More importantly, the manuals have numerous tutorials to help users build an understanding about the models and how to use it. This also helps us to learn what is not clear, so we can improve the documentation together. With the tutorials written in Jupyter notebooks, users can work interactively to master using the model. Such notebooks can be easily adapted into training materials. One recent example is a UMAP online workshop hosted last year, in which we provided SuPy training for an international project. Third, open communication. This is facilitated using GitHub Issues, a communication platform designed to help resolve issues. Through using GitHub Issues, all SuPy-related discussions and communications can be tightly associated with our code on the specific topics. For a specific discussion thread, both users and developers can identify the issues and provide solutions together. These discussions are open to all, and new ideas can be generated from an open world beyond the SuPy project itself, thanks to the flexible referencing by GitHub. Here's a recent example. A user reported an issue in the building energy modeling scheme of SuPy. After collecting related information from the broad GitHub community, the many other active building modeling projects on GitHub, other SuPy users joined the discussion to provide their thoughts with insightful solutions found in other GitHub projects. So SuPy is benefiting from being connected to a broad open community, and users are contributing to SuPy in other ways, not just coding. We've been actively using SuPy in our research. This includes publishing open access papers, and we have more papers using SuPy in the pipeline. SuPy has also been used in our boundary layer meteorology course for surface energy balance modeling. In this course, we have published the SuPy materials as open online notebooks. Use open dataset AmeriFlex and our open model, SuPy, for all simulation tasks. To summarize, through adopting open toolchains and platforms in the SuPy project, we are building an international open research and teaching community that not only makes our research better by more feedbacks, but also gives it a greater reach. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ting. You can stop sharing your slides there. Great, that's great. Thank you very much. So we'll go to questions now. Could I remind you, please, if you'd like to ask Ting a question, please put it into the chat. If you'd like to endorse someone else's question in the chat, give it a thumbs up. I'll only have time to ask probably 2 or 3 questions. So I will pick those that are most popular. Does anybody have any questions? Well, let me kick off with one. I was very impressed, Ting, by the range of user support and tutorial materials that you provided. Do you think that was very much part of the successful uptake of your software by other users? Do you have much evidence of how people are using those training materials?
Okay, thanks for your question, Robert. So I consider the success in documentation part of the overall success of the SuPy project. And since SuPy has been used in our research with other collaborators and also in our teaching, I can see our notebooks are well used as examples and the part of others' work. For the students I'm supervising who are using SuPy in their research, I can see some of the plots are actually reproduced from our example tutorials. So I consider our open notebooks are generating continued values beyond the SuPy software, extending to students' work and other people's research.
Okay, that's great. That's great. Thank you very much. We have a question from Etienne Roche, which is what has been the adoption of SuPy by your community? Any particular challenges? Okay,
thanks for the question. So SuPy currently has been integrated into this larger open source QGIS plugin, UMAP, and one of the cornerstone components in it. So UMAP users might not feel it, but actually all the urban climate simulations are done using SuPy. So I can see SuPy does have a greater reach thanks to the UMAP community. When we are developing this software, we try to make users feel less they are actually using SuPy. So we actually put lots of work behind it to make it available on all platforms and make it computationally more efficient due to its nature and the climate model. So actually we put lots of efforts in making it fast. In this project, we adopted this specific technique, so a combination between Fortran and Python. The backend is written in Fortran to make it computationally efficient, while the front end is written in Python. So users have a lot of convenient procedures provided by Python to facilitate their analysis, and are presented in the talk.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And perhaps one more question from Hong Yang. He says, can you introduce some teaching application with your work?
Okay, thanks for the question. So in our boundary layer meteorology course, one part of it is to do the surface energy modeling. In previous years, we've been using SUEWS, the Fortran-based urban climate model. It's also the backend of SuPy, and the students are more and more familiar with the Python language, so we decided to use SuPy in the course. So in the course, we provide the SuPy as the tool, and also the open Jupyter notebooks and the teaching materials with some examples in it. So the students can very easily set up the model and use the embedded data from our notebook to kick off their project research Then, based on that, they can easily extend the notebook to their specific purposes for the project work. Like in the course, we might just provide one site for their simulation, but we do provide more data sets of a broader range of sites. So users or the students can choose what site they want to do the simulations. So the examples can be extended to multiple ones. That's how we use our model and open data set in our teaching activities.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Ting. I think we'll have to stop it with the questions there. I see there is another one from Adrian Williams in the chat, so perhaps you want to answer that in the chat yourself.
Okay.
But I think we'll have to move on to our next speaker. I was very impressed, Ting, by all the effort you've put into going out to meet your users halfway and developing your community. And I think it's clear that it's very much work that has paid off in obtaining uptake for your software. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Ting.
Thank you, Roger. Thanks.
Thank you. We're going to move on now to our next presentation. So this is from Alanna Skuse, who is a Wellcome Trust lecturer in the Department of English Literature. She works on early modern representations of self-wounding. She's going to talk about the challenges and benefits of publishing open access monographs in the humanities. So Alanna, over to you. Please share your slides and start when you're ready.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
All right. And can you see that okay?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
That's great. Okay, so hello everybody, and thank you for having me here. So my name's Alanna, and as Robert said, I am an English literature scholar with a particular interest in how people of Shakespeare's time thought about their bodies and medicine. So that interest has led me to publish 2 books open access so far. The first on thinking about cancer during this time, and the second on surgery and disability. And I'm now working on a 3rd book about the history of self-harm. Now, today I want to talk about open access as part of a larger picture of how humanities scholars can engage people, both academics and non-academics, with work that can sometimes seem a bit inaccessible. And I'll argue that open access scholarly publishing, trade writing, which means writing for non-academic audiences, and public engagement cross-pollinate one another in very productive ways. And I'm also going to discuss some of the challenges that I have found associated with open access, especially for the humanities. Now, my own journey into open access is born out of necessity. So my PhD, my postdoc, and now my university award have all been funded by the Wellcome Trust. And the Wellcome have been banging the drum for open access for about a decade now, well before this was really a priority widely in the humanities. And the result is that both of my books and the vast majority of my articles, I think all but one, have been published open access. And that means that I've had more of a chance than most humanities scholars to experience the benefits of this kind of publishing. So the first benefit, which is not all that often talked about, but is making research available to the people that it is broadly speaking about. So Surgery and Selfhood, the book with the man putting a leg back on, is a historically focused text, as you can see, but it deals with a lot of issues around disability and identity. And now in disability studies, they have a saying, no about us without us. And that basically means we've got a moral obligation not to exclude people with disabilities from conversations that involve them. And that's especially true when, as in my case, people from excluded groups have been very generous in giving me their time and expertise to help me run public engagement events like the ones on your screen now, which have in turn informed my research. So what else is open access doing? Well, open access texts get read more. A Springer Nature report from 2017 found that OA books received on average 7 times more downloads than non-OA books, and I found that to be true. My first book, Constructions of Cancer, has been downloaded over 17,000 times. And for a book on a pretty specialist topic, that's really quite extraordinary. The second book's really only just come out, but the publisher tells me that it has around 40% more downloads than non-OA books published at about the same time. Open access journal articles also do better than their counterparts. Last year, 2 articles which I published actually several years apart were both in the most read section of the Journal for Social History of Medicine at the same time. And please excuse the arrows I drew on this. I was very excited at the time. But what's perhaps more important was the breadth of readership that open access facilitates, especially when it's combined with other activities. So I've for quite a long time done quite a lot of public engagement work, speaking at events and organising things, but I never really connected that to my academic publishing. But last year I decided to start doing a little bit more writing for non-academic audiences, with articles in places such as The Conversation and History Today. And what I found rather unexpectedly is that some of those very broad appeal pieces designed for a really wide readership were actually driving readership of my academic work as well. So, for example, after I published a piece on The Conversation in March, the one with the nose, my cancer book climbed 13,000 places in the Amazon Kindle rankings, literally overnight. So that's an imprecise measure because it is relative to other things on Kindle, but it does give a broad picture of uplift from people who go straight to Amazon rather than to the publisher platform. And both books also showed a small uplift when I gave a couple of radio interviews about my research in January. And those interviews were in turn connected with the BBC New Generation Thinkers public engagement scheme. So those connections don't always work in the way you might imagine. They are more of a virtuous squiggle than a virtuous circle. And in researching this talk, I looked to an open access article I wrote a few years ago, purely because there's not all that many that have good data available for them. And it's been trundling us along with a steady readership for years, not bad, until you see this great big spike here. And I was trying to think why this might be. And I remembered that I'd had a Twitter exchange with a very popular TV historian called Lindsay Fitzharris. And I sent her the link to that article on Twitter just as a point of reference for something she was writing. And it just so happened that Lindsay's 100,000 followers, well, some of them decided to go and read it too. And that's a really sort of substantial organic engagement with a non-academic audience of a kind that just could not happen if the article was behind a paywall. So that leads me to the last, but certainly not least, of the benefits I've accrued from my open access virtuous squiggle. Now, having over the last year found that through the combination of my non-academic articles and my open access work, there was an appetite for this kind of gory stuff, I decided to put that to the test and see if I could write a trade book, which means basically the kind of history book you can buy in Waterstones. And I've had interest from several parties for that book, partly on the back of the engagement I've been able to show with my other work, and I've now signed with a literary agent to represent that book. So all this sounds like open access is a really wonderful thing, and for me, it definitely has been. But if it's so good, why isn't everyone doing it? Well, the fact is that I've been immensely fortunate to have a funder who has footed the bill for open access throughout my career. And the reason that humanities has tended to lag behind in making research open access is not because they can't see benefits to it, but because there are structural issues which need to be fixed. So if we look first at monographs, currently the only way to publish a monograph open access is to pay a book processing charge, a BPC. Now these can be up to £15,000 and they are paid by universities or funding bodies. Now, as a British Academy report on this topic indicated, there is a problem in that many US publishers just don't offer this option. And there's a second problem that there's such variation in BPCs among different publishers that it might well in future affect either the length of books or the publishers that people go to. Maybe not the best one for the book, but the one that is affordable. And it's a similar kind of story in journal publishing. I had a quick look on the directory of open access journals, and there were 37 fully open access English literature journals. And of those, 3 cover the Renaissance period. Bear in mind, this is one of the biggest areas in English literature research. 2 of those only accept articles about a particular person. So publishing in fully open access journals is just not something that's going to happen. And now that leaves 2 options. Either you can pay a journal to publish your article open access, and that used to be the predominant model, but it obviously excludes people who don't have access to that funding, and Wellcome very recently stopped endorsing that model. Now, option 2 is to publish under a transformative agreement or a read and publish agreement, where a big publisher like Wiley does a deal with a university to cover the cost of open access. And that model works really well, unless, again, you're a precariously employed early career researcher who maybe doesn't have institutional backing. Now, these problems of limited accessibility and publishing opportunities already prevent some researchers from accessing all those soft benefits of open access I've described, the exposure, the tie-in with other writing, and so on. However, what's more worrying is that it looks like both journal articles and monographs may have to be open access in order to be considered eligible for the next rep, whenever that is. As the British Academy suggests, this might mean that researchers coming out of PhDs were left with a choice: either don't publish or publish non-open access items which are ineligible for the rep, and therefore disadvantage yourself in an already very difficult job market. So what is the solution to this? Obviously, it's unclear. It's been suggested that the cost of UKRI covering everyone's open access would be around 20 million, which is a lot, but not in comparison to the 6 billion that they spend overall. That would only work, however, for ECR and precariously employed academics if universities are prepared to act generously by offering, say, recently graduated PhD students an institutional home so that they can continue to access those sources of funding.
30 seconds to go.
On a personal level, it's a bit more obvious. I'm attempting to advocate for open access by being an open research champion and by being a member of the UKRI Early Career Forum, where we keep coming back to these concerns. I'm also making the most of the connections open access can facilitate between academia and public communication. I hope to have shown that when we get this right, we make research more open not only for academics, but for everybody else as well. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Alanna. So we'll go to questions now. Does anybody want to ask Alanna a question? We've got one from Etienne here. Etienne asks, have you yourself felt you had to make any effort to translate your research to an audience outside of your typical circles, I guess outside of your academic circles?
It's not really an effort, because it's always something that I've been interested in doing, because my research very much speaks to modern practices and modern ways of thinking. And when I have done things like my public engagement work, it's actually fed back into the research and made it better. So in terms of time, I guess I'm making the effort. You know, the non-academic articles and the non-academic book don't write themselves, but they are fun things to do. It's not really a chore.
Great, thank you very much. We've got a question from Alison. Thinking about institutional homelessness, do you have examples of universities where this is being addressed and helping graduates to achieve open access? Perhaps something you've heard of through the UKRI forum?
I don't, unfortunately. I have more examples of places where it's bad than places where it's good at the moment. And from my personal experience, having spent a few years in the kind of badlands of early career temporary teaching jobs, it's a big problem, because you can't do the research if you can't get access to the stuff. You can't publish the research if you're not affiliated with the university. And it's not so much lack of desire to provide that as just an ignorance that it is necessary. I think I don't think there's opposition to it, just nobody has really kind of cottoned on that this is something that's necessary.
Right, something they're going to have to start thinking about soon, given the policy changes on the horizon.
Exactly.
Yes. OK, let's ask one more question. I think we have time for one more, and there are some others in the chat that maybe you can answer afterwards. So Karen asks, is it possible to buy your book in print? And do you think some authors are discouraged from publishing open access because they won't get royalties?
I'm not getting any royalties anyway. You can buy my book in print. Libraries buy my book in print. But certainly in the humanities, the vanishingly small amount of royalties we would get from publishing is not worth the hit that you take when your book is inaccessible, because it's, I mean, I'm not sure about the sciences, but humanities monographs for a hardback can be £100. So you're just increasing your readership so much by having it open access that really the financial side of it is not relevant. And luckily, trade books don't have to be open access.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Alanna. I think we'll have to leave it there for the questions. There are some more in the chat if you want to address those separately, or come back to them at another time. So thank you very much. I found it very encouraging that you've really embraced the benefits of publishing open access, and also you're looking for ways to influence policy and help your fellow researchers make informed choices through the UKRI forum. So some virtual applause for Alanna, please. Okay, we are now ready to move on to our next talk, which is from David Brayshaw, Associate Professor, and Hannah Bloomfield, Research Scientist in the Department of Meteorology. So they're here to talk about the work of the Energy Meteorology Group, which has been sharing data sets relating to the influence of climate on the renewable energy sector. So I see you've shared your slide. David and Hannah, please start when you're ready.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So yes, I'm David Brayshaw. I'm an associate professor in climate science, and we want to basically, well, so I lead the Energy Meteorology Research Group in the Department of Meteorology, and with my colleague Hannah Bloomfield, I want to talk to you about some of the open research we've been doing around the sharing of meteorological information to support clean energy transitions. I want to emphasise this is very much a group effort, where some of our support, some of the other contributors in the audience here, so Paula, Andrew, John and Phil particularly, but also sort of past and present members of the Energy Met Group have contributed in various forms over several years. So firstly, just to kind of motivate the problem, climate change is driving a complete transformation of the energy sector, particularly the electricity sector. On the supply side, there's a rapid growth in the use of technologies that depend on weather. So we're thinking wind and solar, with hundreds of billions of dollars being invested in these every year. On the other hand, there's also a move to electrify other sectors, particularly thinking about transport and heating. And collectively, these changes on both the supply and the demand side are completely changing the exposure of the energy system to weather. So this, without getting into the details of it, leads to two broad categories of problems. The first is the ability of the infrastructure we have, the energy infrastructure we have, to cope with the impacts of a changing climate. Secondly, we have the issue of we're designing new infrastructure that's going to last for many decades. That infrastructure, is it robust to the kind of climate we might face and the changes that may come over that period? So there's a real need for interaction between the energy and the climate research community. But historically, that has been a really weak link. And this has been kind of at the heart of the work we're doing in the Energy Met Group for many years now. The idea of building open data, models and tools, and providing open access publications, and ultimately kind of trying to build an interdisciplinary community around this space. And kind of, I like the analogy of a bridge. If the data, open data is a big topic in energy research at the moment. The open data is the platform, it's the thoroughfare through which the exchange happens. But there's a real need for the kind of developing the community and the understanding and exchange, the science, if you like, behind it, for robust solutions to these problems. So in terms of the work that's happened in the group, it's kind of taken place over the last decade or so, beginning in the early part of the sort of early 2010s, that involved in a number of studies kind of exploring the impacts and the use of climate information in energy. There was a lack of awareness of any issue there, so a lot of the initial work was around exploring this as a problem. But right from the get-go, we've always been focused on using widely accessible data. Now, back at the early period, this wasn't necessarily fully open access data, but it was always the widely accessible, research accessible data sets that didn't sit behind a wall, that researchers could freely access them. A fairly big breakthrough happened in around about 2012 to 2015, where we were funded by National Grid on a series of projects. Essentially, National Grid had experienced people building a lot of wind farms in the UK, and this was driving problems for how that resource was managed. So thinking things like wind drought and rapid changes in wind power output, these pose major problems for the grid to manage. So we developed a series of tools around this. Initially, these were published on group web pages and on Centaur. This kind of predates the research repository in the university. But in later days, we sort of moved to using the research repository. But a series of data sets were kind of developed around that time. Since then, we've built on that, and we have a series of data sets now spanning many different technologies, so wind, solar, and also the demand side. It spans different European countries, and this includes both historic data, weeks ahead forecasts, sort of the idea of forecasting and dealing with uncertainty in that space, and also a series of models and tools for kind of running simple energy system models. So basically, we've now got about 7 major data sets, around about 10 gigabytes, a couple of open access book chapters. We've very much pushed the idea of those being open access, and a number of open access gold journal publications, but also everything else is published on green. Industrial use, we have a number of industrial users and research users from around the world, and the data sets have been quite widely used in our own teaching, and particularly in sort of undergraduate projects and MSc dissertations, but also in a module that I convene on climate services. An additional area of contribution is we've also been very active in developing 2 major EU projects developing climate service demonstrators. So this is deliberately about getting climate data out to end users, and we've played a very active role in developing those. So if the challenge of the past was kind of the demonstration principle and getting people interested and enabling access to the raw data, I think the challenge for the future is that, well, all that continues, but there's this exchange and community building that's the kind of the problem. So if you like, we've kind of got this truckload of climate data, petabytes of climate data, and we've kind of handed them the keys, but the issue is then fitting it into the modelling frameworks that they use. So we've run a series of educational events, a number of different workshops, particularly the next generation challenge in energy climate modelling. We ran one last year, another one planned for next year, and these are online, interactive, free and open events. They're attended by about 80 people around the world, the last one. But so we're trying to promote that communication aspect. So that's kind of the big picture of the Energy Met group. But I'm going to hand over to my colleague now, Hannah, who's been very much at the forefront of developing the latest generations of these data sets.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so the first thing I really want to emphasise is that this data sets have been used a lot, not just by other academics, but also we've had quite a lot of engagement with people in different types of industry. So we've made data sets on lots of different timescales. There's lots of different timescales of interest in the energy sector. For example, if you're working in the control room in National Grid, you might be interested in weather forecasts, so a few days to a couple of weeks ahead, thinking about whether you need oil or gas plants or if it's going to be windy or not. And maybe at longer timescales, if you're interested in year-to-year variability or climate change, policymakers very interested in that. And we've had some interest from people working in these kind of problems. Next slide, please. So how open data has helped me. I started my PhD in 2013 in the Energy Met group with David. And Energy Met, you know, that's 2 disciplines, that's energy and climate and meteorology. There's a lot going on. And what really helped me was that when I started in the group, there was already open data. Dan and Dirk, pictured as my guardian angels on the screen here, they'd already produced well-documented open access code and data, which was a fantastic starting point for me. And, you know, from what Sarah was saying earlier, having open data as well as publications is a really nice way to learn when you can really get stuck into using it. And I found that really helpful. Next slide, please. So when I finished my PhD, we decided to make some of my data open and from subsequent postdocs. And for me, this was a bit terrifying. A lot of questions go through your head. The imposter syndrome kicks in. And I'm quite a messy person generally, so this was quite a big challenge for me. But overall, I think this has been really, really rewarding. So next slide, please. One of the big things I did was publish a data set of European demand, wind and solar power. At the point I published the data set, the postdoc project had to move on and I didn't have much time to use it. But the data set was fantastic for student projects. So this is Charlie, a summer student from a couple of years ago, he did a Reading Europe project, undergraduate research opportunities programme. And he got so far with this data that we actually ended up writing it up as a paper. So this article came out open access, funded open access because Charlie is a student at Reading, and also another paper that I wrote in parallel. Next slide, please. They started to get quite a lot of attention from other people around Europe. And what I found really interesting was people from all of these universities were emailing me and David, and they weren't really saying, I've read your paper and it's really interesting. They were kind of saying, we've looked at your data set and it looks really interesting. They've then gone to the paper, they've had a read around, and then they've contacted us. I was actually really concerned to start with that if you publish data open access, no one will ever want to collaborate with you and talk to you because it's already open. But actually, we found the opposite happened, and it made for some really great engagement. Next slide, please. As well as this, the methods are also being used in Mexico and the USA. We published the methods so people could adapt it to their own use case, and this has been really excellent. Next slide, please. Yes, the impact of our data sets. It's not just academics using these. The Met Office have done some work with the National Infrastructure Commission to make these two high impact reports here. The Royal Society are also writing a report that me and David are involved in, and there's a lot of ongoing discussion with National Grid. Next slide.
30 seconds.
Perfect timing. So just to sum up, we know that energy systems are rapidly changing, and a key aspect of this is to building lots of renewable energy. Data to quantify this is difficult. There's two disciplines involved in renewable energy, both the weather and climate side and the energy modelling. And the huge team of our little faces down the bottom there, as well as many others, have now been working on this for quite a long time, and it's really worked well because of the open data and publications that we've been able to make. So thank you for listening. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Hannah. That was great. So we've got one question for you and David so far. If anybody else wants to ask a question, please put it into the chat. So the question is from Carolyn Knowles, and it's: do you have to provide a lot of documentation to support other users to access open data sets, things like definitions, metadata? And did providing that information help with your own methods development and or analysis of the data?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and that was something that scared me quite a lot at the start, because there's a lot of acronyms and things in personal research, and when you actually go to strip it back, you're like, oh, actually, I'm almost speaking my own language here, you know, rather than something everyone can understand. I found the Reading Research Data Archive quite useful to get me started because I could see other examples of what people had done as metadata, and I don't think you have to provide that much that would be difficult for you when you're publishing open access data sets here. I found that it was just being very thorough and reading it through, trying to think about, if I'd never seen this before, what would I make of it? The thing that I found most challenging was deciding which data format to use. So meteorologists tend to like this thing called NetCDF format, which is not as commonly used. Say you can't load it into an Excel spreadsheet or something. So we decided to make CSV files with all our data in. And I think from the energy community, that meant we got quite a lot more uptake, even though it was a bit more effort for me, but worth it.
Great, thank you very much, Hannah. We've got another question from Al. Starts off with a comment. This is Al Edwards. So he said your opening comment on the value of open data sets at the start of your PhD is really compelling. Inspired me to think about if this can be done in my own research group in totally different field. This is, would you be able to summarize what makes a data set accessible to a new PhD student?
Yes. It helped me so much. David's probably listening to this like, oh, I thought you were much more competent than you actually were because Dirk and Dan have given you so much help. But yeah, I think for me, what really helped was, so they published code for a model, which was very well commented. So for each step, I knew exactly what was going on. There was no assumed knowledge, because to be honest, I had none. So it was good they assumed nothing. And as well as this kind of model and data, they wrote me in emails some accompanying very non-scientific text, just being like, if you care about this aspect of the problem, you want to look at this, you know, some kind of more general conversational text about it, which was actually really helpful to step back from the hardcore kind of science language. But yeah, it definitely helped me as a starting PhD a lot, and it pushed me to make my data open access, even though it was very scary, because it's been useful for projects. Me and David, we've used it quite a lot, haven't we, to start projects off, and I think that's been really, you can hit the ground running without much effort from us if it's all there already, year after year.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Hannah. I think we'll have to leave it with the questions there for now. But I think it's great to hear about a real team effort with a whole research group building your capacity and data sharing and developing those data curation skills, learning to apply, you know, the important lesson that documentation is absolutely essential to making your data accessible and reusable. I'm also, of course, delighted that you've been using the university's research data archive to share these data sets. So some virtual applause, please, for Hannah and David. That's great. Thank you very much. So now we come to our last presentation. Luke Barnard is a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Meteorology. Oh, excuse me, Meteorology. I sometimes have trouble with that word, but I have to say it quite a lot. Along with Professor Matthew Owens, Luke explores the influence of solar activity on the near-Earth space environment. And Luke's going to talk about their work to develop an open source model of solar wind. So Luke, please share your slides and start whenever you're ready.
Hi, can you all hear me okay?
Yes, that's fine, thank you.
Great, so thank you. Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Luke Barnard, and in this presentation I will describe our work on creating an open source numerical model of the solar wind, which is called HUXT. I'm aiming to cover a brief introduction of what space weather is and our research within it, and then I want to explain how space weather research increasingly relies upon open source software and open research practices. And then for the last half of the talk, I'll speak more specifically about our work developing HUXT and the impacts it has had on our research and the community we work in. The animation you can see shows output from our model HUXT. A wind of plasma continuously flows away from the sun and out through the solar system, and HUXT models this process. The lighter regions show streams of faster solar wind flowing at about 700 kilometers per second, while the darker regions show solar wind flowing at about 400 kilometers per second. And it looks a bit like a garden sprinkler because the sources of fast and slow solar wind at the sun change very slowly, but the sun rotates once every 27 days. But separate from these continuous fast and slow streams, there are sporadic eruptions of mass and magnetic field called coronal mass ejections. And you can see these too in this animation. They're quickly flowing away from the sun with different sizes, speeds and directions. And these coronal mass ejections are the main source of space weather at Earth and the key topic of our research. So this video shows some spacecraft observations of CMEs erupting from the sun's atmosphere. The orange region shows the sun at extreme ultraviolet wavelengths, whilst the outer green region shows the sun's atmosphere at visible wavelengths. And this video lasts about 10 days, and over this period you can see about 5 large impulsive eruptions. And these are all CMEs, and some of them were directed towards the Earth. Well, when a CME reaches Earth, it can cause a range of impacts that affect society. They can squeeze and shake Earth's magnetic field, which can cause a geomagnetic storm. And during a geomagnetic storm, we often experience disruptions to radio and satellite communications, and they also increase the errors in GPS navigation systems. CMEs can also cause increases in the levels of radiation in near-Earth space and in the upper atmosphere, and this can be a problem for spacecraft, astronauts, and sometimes commercial aircraft too. It's been estimated that an extreme space weather event could cost the UK around £2 billion per day in damages and lost services. To manage these risks, different agencies around the world produce space weather forecasts. And in the UK, the Met Office does this. Well, this video shows a recent space weather forecast from last week that was made by the Space Weather Prediction Center in the US. And these figures show how the density and the speed of the solar wind is forecast to change over the next 7 days. And this is produced by a numerical model which includes lots of parameters and physical processes. And it's a good model, but it takes about an hour to run with good computing resources, and the code isn't openly available to everyone. To run these kinds of models, we need to know the conditions near the sun where the solar wind and CMEs form. But because of challenges observing the sun and limits to our understanding of all the relevant physics, we have a lot of uncertainty about what these conditions are. And a useful approach to help understand and quantify this uncertainty is ensemble modelling. This is used a lot routinely in weather forecasts on Earth, but it's still quite a new idea in space weather forecasting. In ensemble modelling, we run models many times, each time with different starting conditions that represent our uncertainty in those starting conditions. And then the spread of the forecast is a measure of the uncertainty in the forecast. For example, we're particularly interested in the uncertainty of when a CME will arrive at Earth. However, it's challenging for us to develop ensemble methods with the models typically used to forecast space weather, because they're too computationally expensive to run for the sizes of ensembles that we want to use, and many of them aren't openly available. This is why we developed HUXT. So with HUXT, we use some approximations to reduce the complexity of the model. This makes it around 1,000 times more efficient to run than models normally used for space weather forecasting. The cost of this improvement is a small reduction in the accuracy of the model of a few %. But this is much less than the uncertainty in the model starting conditions, which is why HUXT is still useful for running ensembles. HUXT is written in Python and only requires modest computing resources to run. A standard laptop is fine, and this helps make it accessible to pretty much anyone with an interest in using it, and no significant computing resources are required. So these images show a comparison of the HUXT solution on the right with one of the more advanced models that don't make the same simplifying approximations on the left, and both capture the same large-scale features really similarly. Some obvious questions are, why would you write HUXT in Python, and why would you make it open source? Well, the answer is that there's a really productive community of Python-based open source software that supports space weather research. Software packages such as SunPy, AstroPy, and SpacePy have been really important to our own research for some years now. And these are all open source packages written in Python that are freely available and well supported. Things like this have made research projects possible that would otherwise have been impractical for us, and they have generally accelerated and supported our research aims. So with HUXT, we wanted to contribute something to our research community, and we hope that through HUXT we can enable other people's research in a way that we've been enabled by other open source projects in the past. So in developing HUXT, we wanted it to not only be efficient enough to enable our own research, but we wanted it to be open source, easy to obtain, and easy to use. So therefore, we published HUXT under the MIT license, which is a simple, permissive open source software license, and we've made the code available through both GitHub and also Zenodo via our research group's GitHub account. And so as a group in general, we actually try to provide any software and code supporting our research and publications on GitHub and Zenodo. And this has worked well for us. So working through GitHub made it simple for other researchers outside of our group to provide feedback and report issues on our code. And so early on, this helped us with some outside colleagues who provided a review of our code. That helped us spot a few bugs and helped us improve the usability of HUXT. Well, HUXT was published in February 2020, and since then, many of our aims with HUXT have been realised. It's been central to 3 of our group's recent publications, research papers, and it's being used and developed by 3 PhD students in our group for their research, which helps give them useful experience of open source software development. Also, interest in HUXT has led to new international collaborations with teams in the US, out in California, Austria, and China. And so we've already submitted 1 new publication that was generated from these new collaborations, and we've got 2 more underway. In terms of our own research, in one of our papers from last year, we actually used HUXT to successfully demonstrate a new method for improving CME arrival time forecasts at Earth, using this ensemble modelling approach in conjunction with some spacecraft observations of a CME flowing towards Earth. And we were really pleased that this was a high impact paper published in AGU's Gold Open Access Advances journal. This journal, Advances, has an open peer review process where all the reviews are published along with the paper. And this was a new experience for us, which was generally really positive. Although a bit daunting, I think the open review process makes all parties engage with the review a bit more collaboratively, rather than the slightly more aggressive and combative approach that can be quite common in anonymous and private reviewing. This article will receive quite a lot of attention, being picked up in over 100 news outlets, and so far off the back of this work we've generated and submitted a UKRI NERC research proposal that we can hope we can carry it forward with. Well, in terms of impacts on teaching, earlier this year we heard from a professor at Peking University that they have now integrated HUXT into their master's course on heliophysics. Being open source, they are able to do this simply without any input from us because the code's there, it's documented, and it's ready to go.
30 seconds.
Oh, they gave us some feedback that HUXT has been a valuable tool for teaching about the dynamics and how to model it. And this is my last quick slide. Finally, looking to the future, we've got more that we want to do with HUXT. So the UKRI Swimmer programme is a £20 million research fund that aims to improve the UK space weather monitoring and forecasting capabilities. And we're now funded with this to work with the Met Office Space Weather Operations Centre to develop HUXT into an operational model for them. And having seen our work so far, they're enthusiastic about the benefits that HUXT ensemble modelling could offer their forecasters. So yeah, that's all I have to say about how open research and open software has affected our work. And thank you very much for your time.
That's great. Thank you very much, Luke. So we now have some time for questions for Luke. Does anybody want to post any questions in the chat? I will kick off with a question. I was interested in what your experience has been of providing the user support and resources to help other people make use of your software, and have you found the investment of time in that has repaid you?
It's been a learning curve for me because it's sorry, I'm dog sitting and it's slightly noisy. It's been a new experience for me because it's not something I'm used to doing, and so I think it's probably taken more time than it necessarily needs to because there's been that learning curve. But actually, it's been very useful because it's helped bed down. It's helped bed down those new collaborations because you're having discussions with people and they're making you think about your work and your work with them. It's also helped us think about more fundamentally are there issues with HUXT that need to be developed in the future, like how should we be developing it to make it better. And so although it has been a bit of a time sink, it's generally been positive, and I've been glad to do it. So
do you see a direct relationship between the decision to go down the open source path and the quality of the research that is coming out of the HUXT model through the making it available to others to contribute to and to develop?
So yeah, all of my first author papers since 2017 have had their software and data published online, and ever since I started doing that, it has made my work better because I have to be more conscientious about how the code is written and just more deliberate about making sure that it does what it's supposed to do in the way it's supposed to do. And so with each project, I feel I get a bit more competent and confident in how I do that. So each project gets a bit faster, but it does definitely improve the quality of my research and how it's presented to the outside world. There's nothing like the idea of having someone's watchful eye over your back looking at the code you've written to focus your mind in making sure it's up to scratch.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we've got one more question. Nikolai Hauf asks, where is the reduction of accuracy relevant?
It's a really good question, and it's something we're still exploring actually. But there are some processes and parameters that we're not able to model with HUXT. For example, we don't specifically model the magnetic field. We only look at the flow of the plasma. But actually, at the minute, there's very little predictability in the magnetic field properties. Like the skill of those forecasts is very, very low, even for the more advanced models. And so, although we've lost some fidelity from our model by looking at only a subset of the physics, in practice, it doesn't really reduce the skill of our model that much, but that will change in future as those models further develop. So it's likely that the reduction in accuracy will become a bigger issue, but at the same time, we'll be developing HUXT in tandem. So we hope that practically we're still going to be providing a useful service with this slightly more accessible and efficient model.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I think we'll have to pause it there on the questions. There are a couple more in the chat, so you might want to respond to those when you have a bit of time. But thank you very much, Luke. I think that was a very nice conclusion to our set of finalist presentations.
Thank you very much.
Great to see the choice to go open source, having results for you in terms of collaborations, increase in impact of research, and also feeding into development of your model and improvement of the quality of your research. So a very nice case study to end on. Thank you very much for Luke. So now we come to your chance as the audience to vote for what you think is the best presentation. And let me remind you here that there is a £150 prize for the entrant who wins the vote. So this is how it will work and what could possibly go wrong. In a moment, we will launch a poll. If you're joining via the Teams desktop app, you should see this poll in the center of your screen. If you've joined us via your browser, I think you will see this poll in your chat window. When the poll is launched, you will be able to select one of our finalists and then submit to cast your vote. The poll will be open for 30 seconds. You can vote only once. You can switch your vote while the poll is live, but you still only have one vote. You're not adding votes if you vote for somebody else. You're just switching from the original vote. When the poll is closed after 30 seconds, I will call the winner. If the poll is tied, then we will defer to Parveen, Professor Parveen Yaqoob, who will tender the casting vote. So are we ready? Fred, if you want to open the poll whenever you're ready.
That should be visible for everyone now.
Yep, that's great. I can see that. Fred, do you want to let me know when the poll is about to close and then when it's closed?
Yep, so it's starting to look like everyone should have voted, so I'm going to be closing it now. Let's see that we have 2 on 32%, so I'm just going to check that they have. We might have a tie on our hands.
I'm seeing 17 votes for surgery and Selfhood and 17 for meteorological data for the transition to future clean energy systems. Is that right?
Yes, that should be right.
Okay, we have to deploy the casting votes in that case. Parveen, can I ask you to exercise your decision?
I was praying that this was not going to happen. I am going to cast my deciding vote for David Brayshaw and Hannah Bloomfield, and I'll explain why in just a minute. Congratulations.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Parveen. So it gives me great pleasure to confirm that the prize for best presentation will go to David Brayshaw and to Hannah Bloomfield. So congratulations to both of you. I don't know if we can get Hannah on camera briefly to give a little wave. We've got David. We've got both of you. Fantastic. So congratulations, well-deserved best presentation prize. Thank you for a really informative and interesting presentation, and congratulations on winning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Some virtual applause for David and Hannah. Congratulations. So we now come to the announcement of the placement of our finalists by the award panel. And this will culminate in an announcement of the overall winner of the 2021 Open Research Award. And let me just remind you here that prizes will be given as follows. For joint third places, there will be £150 each. For second place, £250. And for the winner, a prize of £500. So I'm now going to hand over to Parveen again, and Parveen will make the announcements. So Parveen, all yours.
Thank you, Robert. Well, what a fantastic session. But before I present the Open Research Awards, I'd just like to thank Robert for initiating them to showcase the very best of our open research. I've so enjoyed the presentations this afternoon and of course reading the submissions. We had an extremely difficult job judging these awards. What you saw today was our top 4, and there were 3 key things that the panel was looking for in terms of the winners. The first was relevance and fit to the brief. The second was open outputs or materials, and we were particularly interested in seeing primary data supporting publications being fully available or software codes being available under open source license and so on. And the third thing we were looking for was the interest and substance of the case study. We were looking for benefits not just for the researchers themselves and other researchers, but wider stakeholder groups. So, for example, industry, members of the public, and so on. So I'm going to announce the joint third place winners to begin with. In joint third place were Luke Barnard and David Brayshaw and team. So Luke submitted his entry with Matthew Owens, and we really like the fact that they discussed the benefits of making their software open source, that it led to the development of new research collaborations, it was used in graduate training programs and in Met Office applications. They were candid also about the challenges of making the transition from writing software for research to supporting an open source product, but they also discussed the strategies that they used to overcome those challenges. For example, by inviting experienced developers to review their software. So congratulations to you both, Luke and Matthew. Cue for virtual applause. So David Brayshaw, as you saw, was part of a team, and what we liked about their entry was the sustained distribution of open data over a period of several years under open license in the university's research data archive, with multiple open access articles describing their research methods. And that meant that other stakeholders, including the Met Office, could easily use them. And there's clear evidence that many stakeholders are indeed doing that. But we also really like the team approach. It bodes really well for the next generation of researchers. And that's what made me choose that in my casting vote. Really impressive. Congratulations, David, and your team. Cue virtual applause. So, moving on to second place, the panel decided to award second place to Ting Sun with SUEWS and also from Meteorology with their submission Urban Climate Modelling using SuPy, enhancing the SUEWS community. And what we really liked about this entry was the way that the author's learning journey was described. It really highlighted the clear lessons about the need to support open resources with good documentation and to think carefully about choosing the right online platform to build an active user community. So congratulations, Ting Sun and Sue, for your second place award. So finally, the winner of the Open Research Award is, of course, Alanna Skuse, lecturer in English literature, with her entry titled Surgery and Selfhood Lessons from Open Humanities Publishing. This was a superb entry, and it was the sheer commitment to embedding openness in humanities research that really stood out for the panel. It's absolutely clear that there's a limited range of open access publication venues in the humanities, but Alanna illustrated the benefits of publishing her monographs open access, including an increase in readership and enhanced engagement with a non-academic audience. And I think we saw that in her presentation today. What we felt made this case study really distinctive was the author's proactive response to the challenges in the humanities publications landscape. She's an early adopter in every sense, influencing emerging policy through her membership of the UKRI Early Career Researcher Forum, and she's working to help her colleagues at Reading to make informed open access choices through her role as an open research champion. So we were unanimous in our decision that Alanna Skuse should be the recipient of the university's 2021 Open Research Award. Congratulations, Alanna. So I'd like to hand back now to Phil Newton to wrap up.
So thanks, Parveen. Thanks very much, Parveen. What a great way to spend the last couple of hours. Been absolutely fantastic. Going right from the global perspective and then right down to the very specific examples of open research and its impacts and benefits and challenges and problems. We are planning to write up a number of these case studies and publish them on our website so that others can learn from your experiences, and not only the presentations we've seen today, but also some of the other applicants to the award that we haven't heard from today. So that will be great to see in due course. I guess you know, one of the things in recent years that has been disappointing and a challenge has been the sense that the ability of research to shape the world and the society that we live in has been weakening for a number of reasons that we've heard about today and a few others. So I think it's really encouraging to feel that we at the University of Reading are part of, and in a sense at the heart of, a growing global effort to try and combat that by increasing our use of open research to increase the quality of research and, just as importantly, increase the trustworthiness of research, because some of it's real and some of it is about perception. So I think we're very well placed to do that. We heard earlier from Sarah about the global context for that, and certainly the publication of the UNESCO guidelines and advice is going to be helpful in bringing others along. So the last thing I really wanted to mention was the UK national level. Parveen mentioned that we are part of the UK Reproducibility Network, which is slightly broader than open research, but open research is very much at the heart of it. At the university, we will do everything we can to contribute to that national network in terms of sharing our experiences and our ideas and our examples of practice. And we will equally do everything we can to learn from what other universities across the UK are doing in this space, to share that practice and to grow it. As a network, we are talking to Research England, one of the major funders within UKRI, about their support for open research, how to support it financially, but also how to better incentivise it to deal with this fundamental problem that I outlined a couple of minutes ago. So I think we have good reason to be optimistic, and it's great for Reading to be at the heart of this. Thanks ever so much to everybody who's contributed to today's meeting, which includes all of those of you who have attended and participated. I think to finally wrap up, very important to thank very specifically Robert Darby, Fred Breeze, Alison Sutton and Jeremy Laline, who've in different ways made fundamental contributions to making sure that this event has happened, but not only the event on the day, of course, all the work that's gone into it to make it a fair and equitable and open process with some very high quality contributions for us to enjoy. I mentioned earlier this is the second one of these events that we've run. Actually, through the UK Reproducibility Network, we've shared our experiences, and 4 or 5 other universities have run similar events in very similar ways. They haven't had to reinvent the wheel in terms of how to approach an open research prize, and that's been, I think, very much appreciated by those other universities. A final thanks once again to Sarah de Rijcke for fantastic plenary contribution at the beginning to set the context for today. Thanks to all of those who submitted open research prize applications, not just the finalists, and again, everyone who attended and participated today. So thank you very much. You'll continue to hear from us about open research, hopefully increasingly from our brand new shiny open research champions, and we will be back, and I hope that you will be back too. Thank you very much.